Welcome everyone to this evening's Pandemonium webinar. Thanks to the Far Side for the intro tunes, and thanks to all of you for introducing yourselves as you came in. That's one nice and unique aspect of a webinar, that we get to hear a little bit about the faces that we can't see on the webinar. My name is Meg Holden. I am the director of the Urban Studies program at SFU, together with SFU Public Square. Very happy to be hosting this series of critical and reflexive conversations on the pandemic and on the moment that we find ourselves today in cities. I am also here on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I was particularly grateful to think about living here today when there was a flicker who came by and was knocking on my roof, because it's the only person who knocks on my door these days. And we are also grateful to have member and leader with Musqueam Nation, Wade Grant, here as a panelist, and Wade has agreed to provide a territorial acknowledgement to start us off. Wade.
Thank you very much, Meg. As you stated, my English name is Wade Grant. My traditional name is Tsawla. I am from the Musqueam Nation. I'm actually sitting right now in my home on the Musqueam reservation. And as many of my ancestors and my elders did, I want to welcome each and every one of you to the territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh, who have called what is now the city of Vancouver their home, what we call since time immemorial, because we cannot, through our stories, through our legends, through our histories, we are unable to measure how long our people have lived here. We have carbon dating that puts us here from 9,000 to 10,000 years, but we know we have lived in and around the Fraser River Basin and what's now English Bay since time immemorial. So it's very, very different times, as we all know. I don't think my ancestor who met Captain Narvaez out on the cliffs of Point Grey would have ever imagined that I would be doing the same thing to welcome people into our territory over a webinar. But today, I want to acknowledge each and every one of you for allowing me to say a few words, for recognizing that the territories that we still stand on are unceded. They were never given away. They were never signed away by a treaty. And we are now wanting to move and take our rightful place in the city of Vancouver, side by side with the citizens and the local municipalities. So once again, on behalf of the Musqueam people, the Squamish people, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, we raise our hands and say, Heights Epka Siemiatycki.
Thanks very much, Wade. And very excited to have you with us, and we will be hearing more from you later on. So just to provide a few more introductory remarks before I hand it over to our moderator for this evening. As I mentioned, this event is being co-hosted by SFU Public Square and SFU Urban Studies as part of our effort to wrap our heads around and the current, the kind of stereotypically now unprecedented moment in which we're living, and to do so in a way that is engaging across as full a spectrum as we can of ideas and perspectives on both the opportunities and the crises and constraints that we're living through right now. So this event series is generously financially supported by the Initiative in Urban Sustainable Development that has funding from the Real Estate Foundation of BC, as well as the Fraser Valley Real Estate Association. And you will have noticed coming in that we're recording this session, and that's so it can be posted online to allow more of us to join the conversation. You can find those recordings after the event and for the previous events that we've hosted on either the SFU Public Square Urban Studies websites. We've also added the recordings to our podcast, Temporarily Urbane, that you can find on SoundCloud or any other podcast platform that you use. As I said, thank you for introducing yourselves for those of you who did, and we do look forward to the conversation that will follow the introductory remarks from our panelists. You are all important members of this conversation, and so we encourage you to use the Q&A tab throughout the discussion and not necessarily wait until that moment in the panel, because there may be opportunities for panelists to respond in text to your questions, and you might be able to get an answer that way as well. We will do our best to answer your questions during the question and answer period, but there are quite a number of us tonight, so we anticipate that we may not be able to answer all of the questions, but we will try, and we will also give you a chance to ask your question, time permitting, by allowing yourself to be unmuted when we get to that point. I think that our friends at Public Square have already mentioned in the chat window that there is closed captioning available for those of you for whom that's useful. And there is a control in your Zoom controls to turn that on so that you can look at the text of what's being spoken as well as listen to it. So without any further ado, those are my words of welcome. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Professor Peter Hall, Professor of Urban Studies at SFU, and himself a specialist in regional economics, looking at port logistics in port cities around the world, as well as community economic development. And Peter himself has just released an important study on transit subsidies and what they do to the commuting behaviors of hotel workers in our city too. Peter.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Meg, for that introduction, and thanks, Wade, for welcoming us to the territories of the Coast Salish people. I want to just start by also thanking Meg and the whole team from Urban Studies, Seth and Janet and Rachel and the team from Public Square for putting the event together. I think everyone's going to have a very interesting evening. We've got a really just a great panel to help us get into a conversation about the post-COVID-19 urban economy. You know, as I was thinking about what we might talk about tonight, of course, with academics, the tendency is always to sort of look back and, you know, ask where we've come from, and we're not always that good at looking forward. So I just want to say the pre-COVID economy, in one sense, was great for cities. It concentrated a lot of activity in urban spaces. The benefits of agglomeration seem to have taken off. There's this interesting way in which the more technology has allowed us to do things that we want to do anywhere, it's actually made it possible for us to do things in urban places. And so the last 30 years, we've seen just huge flows of capital and people and ideas and money into urban places. And that's been good and that's been bad. That's really brought a new level of kind of investment in real estate. It's brought a new focus on urban economies and urban spaces as the drivers of national and global economies. And along with that has just come a whole lot of inequality in urban spaces. Because those same processes that have focused economic activity in urban spaces have also been destabilizing. They've favored larger players. They've favored certain actors who have more access to those opportunities than others. So the urban economy was a dynamic and interesting and contested space before COVID. And I'm sure that our panelists are going to get into how that is playing out through the crisis, and will inform the kind of emerging post-COVID urban economy that's waiting for us, and that we all have a role in creating, hopefully in a better way, in a way that solves the problems that are becoming manifest, and does truly move in a more sustainable and equitable direction. So we've asked all of the panelists to make a few opening remarks, somewhere in the order of 5 minutes to get us going. What are they seeing? What are they seeing as the impacts? What are they seeing as the emerging responses? What is happening? How is it happening? And who is being affected? Who in terms of citizens, in terms of governments, in terms of businesses of different sizes and scales, and so on. And after they've made a few introductory remarks, we'll have a little bit of conversation between the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience, and to everyone to your comments and questions. So first up, Matti Siemiatycki. He's a professor at the University of Toronto, and he's the director of the School of Cities in Toronto. Welcome, Matti, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Meg. What a pleasure to be with you. I'm joining you from Toronto tonight, and it's a great pleasure to be with what I presume is primarily a British Columbia audience. Having done my PhD at UBC and lived in Vancouver for a number of years, it's always great to speak to this audience, and it brings me back to my days in Vancouver, and it's allowed me to think about how wonderful it was to be in that city for some period of time. Now tonight, what I want to speak about is I want to frame my comments around the idea that the old normal is not an option. That the way that we were living before, and the experiences within cities was really at the precipice of three intersecting crises. We have a climate crisis and the impacts of climate change, which are very much an urban crisis. Climate change, much of the cause of climate change, the emissions, a large portion of the emissions are being produced in cities. And so cities played a major role in producing climate change greenhouse gases, and also local air quality emissions primarily from vehicles and industry. So we had a climate crisis. We had a deep crisis of inequality that existed long before the pandemic, and was really perpetuating anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and other forms of systemic inequality in our cities, which were, as Peter mentioned, as our cities were becoming wealthier, there were large portions of our populations that were being left behind. And then this got all exacerbated by what's top of mind for everyone, which is the pandemic, which itself is obviously a public health crisis and emergency. And all of these then are intersecting and are cascading all at the same time, and having deep impacts on our cities and on our economy. Now, what's interesting from an economic perspective is that the pandemic and the related crises, what we're experiencing right now is actually what economists refer to as a supply side recession. That there is, in many ways, there's the demand for products, the demand for goods and services is still there. The challenge is that because of the immediate health crisis, suppliers can't actually deliver on those demands. They can't actually provide the goods and services, either because they can't produce them in their factories, because people are sick with COVID, or because people can't get out of their houses and into the shops and into the communities in order to consume and in order to purchase. And so this is a very different type of crisis than what we've experienced in the past, where shocks to the economic system tend to impact demand first, and then that has a knock-on effect on supply. In this case, actually, it's the supply side of the equation that's posing challenges. And this creates very unique and different impacts on our cities. So let me go through briefly and just speak about a number of sectors that are really struggling with this unique immediate crisis of public health, and then the cascading impacts from climate change and from the issues of systemic inequality and systemic racism that we're seeing. So first is Main Street. I mean, Main Street is just being battered right now. And you can just walk up and down main streets across the country, and you're starting to see for lease signs, you're starting to see closed signs. And, and in many ways, small business is the lifeblood of our communities. It's what makes cities unique. I mean, nothing against big business, nothing against the big box stores or the Shoppers Drug Marts or the London Drugs of the world. But for the most part, people don't move into neighborhoods because there's a great London Drugs. They move into the neighborhood because of the character that's brought to it by the local retailers, and what that says about the community that's there, and the community that what its aspirations and hopes and needs are. And I think that's really important when we start to think about the recovery as well, because what we would really hate to have happen is start to see these patterns of gentrification as this round of businesses close and a new wave comes in, completely erasing our histories, and the relationships that underpin them, and lead towards cities that are much different, and in many cases built for different people. So the crisis of Main Street is one of an economic crisis and a crisis for how we think about our cities. So that's one area. Second, let's talk about the real estate sector, because what we're seeing is that the real estate sector has experienced, in many ways, this very divergent set of experiences. Houses, the property market, ironically, in many parts of the country, at least, has actually picked up through the pandemic as people are looking for different types of places to live, and as for many people, being at home is causing them to rethink their living arrangements. What we're finding is that through the pandemic, upwards of 40% of Canadians are working from home, as compared to 10% before the pandemic. And that's having significant impacts on where people are working, and in particular on our downtown cores. That our downtown cores have essentially been hollowed out and are like ghost towns at the moment. There aren't people there, and that's impacting on the businesses that serve people during the daytime economy. And it's also impacting on all of that real estate, and leading us to think what might be done in those spaces. If people don't go back, first of all, are they going to go back? And second of all, if they don't, what do we do with all of these, we could call them sunk assets, that have been built up over many years and now are sitting vacant? And so there's an opportunity for imagination, but also real trepidation about what has happened in our downtown cores, and the pain that's causing. We're also seeing shifts in the way suburbs are being thought about, and whether suburbs can be rebuilt in different ways to make them more walkable and inclusive. Finally, I want to talk about who's being impacted, because there's real inequalities in who's being impacted. And the economist Armin Yalnizyan has called this a she-cession, and that women and more broadly BIPOC people were impacted most by the recession and by the supply side recession, because the types of places of employment that women and BIPOC members tend to work in tend to be those that were hit hardest by this recession. And so as we rebuild, we really need to think about an equitable recovery. It's not just getting growth going for the sake of growth. It's about thinking about the equitable dynamics of this. So just to conclude by thinking about the next steps of what a recovery looks like, I think the key point is that the future is not predetermined, that the future is really what we make of it, that the pandemic has dealt us a blow, and it's caused a whole lot of uncertainty. But what comes next in many ways is up to us. There's no economy without health. There's no health without a healthy environment. And there's also no growth and no prosperity without inclusive growth and prosperity. And I think as we come out of this pandemic and we try to think about what comes next, it's incumbent on all of us to think about how we plan and how we deliver economies that are more inclusive, sustainable, and just. And just a final point is to think about how we include people in that process. I mean, we are in the midst of massive transformations and massive uncertainty, and you can see it just in the public discourse that in that moment of fear and loss and despair, we are seeing people looking for places to engage in meaningful ways. And I think as we look at how we respond, it's incumbent on all of us to think about how we include communities, and in particular, communities who haven't always been engaged meaningfully and included in these discussions around the state of our economy. And that's, I believe, how we'll build through collaboration, through engagement, meaningful engagement, and by putting equity and the environment at the core of our thinking, that's how we'll build better cities going forward. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Matti, for that opening set of remarks. Next up, Lindsey Thornton from Shopify Vancouver. which is a really nice follow-up to Matti's comments about Main Street and about the diversity of businesses, and not thinking about the category business as a single homogenous blob. Shopify were the topic of a major piece in the New York Times today. Check it out if you have a moment. It's a really interesting read. So welcome, Lynsey, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you to everybody for tuning in to yet another Zoom in, I'm sure, what has already been a day and a week and a 10-month period of Zooms for you all. So there's two lenses really that we at Shopify look through when we're thinking about the pandemic and life beyond. And the first is we are a business ourselves and we have our own experience in the city here. And the second is through the lens of the businesses that operate on our platform. So for anybody who doesn't know who Shopify is, we are a commerce platform that powers over 1 million businesses around the world. And if you have ever bought anything online or even in a retail store, there's a good chance you've used Shopify software along the way. You can think of us as essentially a white label that businesses use to project their own storefront, their own online store, and their own checkout. And then all of the suite of tools and businesses that back that up. So for us, we're a major technology employer in Canada. We're a Canadian startup ourselves. And we entered the year full steam, including a major office announcement for Vancouver in January, only to find that 4 weeks later, we were starting to send our own team members home because of the emerging crisis for COVID. And we had seen this coming a little bit. We had started to see the first steps of the crisis in China. Because we're a worldwide business, we have businesses everywhere using the platform. It didn't take us very long to mobilize our team and to send everybody home. First priority is get the team there. The second priority was, okay, once we've done this, we need to start thinking about the businesses on the platform who were obviously in a full-fledged state of panic at that point. Nobody knew what the coming weeks would bring. And so it was all hands on deck to support those businesses wherever we were. In May, we made the decision to stay remote first forever because we had come to terms at that time that there was no way we were going to be able to offer our team the type of office environment that we would want anytime soon. And so we made that decision early with the intent that, as was mentioned by Matti, this wave is here. Let's ride this rather than wait and sort of assume that the world is going to return to normal at some point. There are a lot of things that will change forever about how businesses operate now, both from a technology and a retailer's perspective. And it is part of our business and our job to get ahead of that. From the retailer side, we saw some really, really interesting trends. Obviously, businesses are in the fight of their lives at the moment. And from day one, when we saw retailer revenue go to almost zero because of store shuttering, we saw a pretty incredible rally from local buyers where retailers were making up to 70% of their regular revenues online instead. And that's because of those local communities that are really doing all they can. And you saw it yourselves in the early weeks of the pandemic in particular, a big rally to buy gift cards, a big rally to support, local pickup and delivery. And our company did a bunch of work on the technology side to make all of those things available really quickly. But I think, thematically, what we're seeing is that the adaptable businesses, which is a classic trait of the entrepreneur to begin, are the ones that will come out and weather this. And it is a incredibly tough time for all of them. But choosing the right technology stack, having the right approach to trying to meet your customer wherever they are, and recognizing some of that local intent are sort of key factors to businesses surviving this pandemic.
Great, thanks so much, Lynsey, for those comments. Next up, who someone whose organization actually runs its own small enterprise, and I'm sure we might get into that topic in a bit, is Angela Marie Mcdougall, who's the Executive Director of the Battered Women's Support Services. Angela has done some very interesting work around the caring economy, and as I say, is in a social enterprise business space as well herself. So welcome, Angela, over to you.
Well, I thank you for that introduction, Peter, and hello, everyone. My name is Angela Marie Mcdougall, and it is a pleasure here to be joining you on these unceded and ancestral territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I thank you, Wade, for the territorial welcome. It is an honor to be in these lands. My people don't come from this country that we now call Canada. My ancestors make their way to these lands by way of Western Africa, the Ashanti people, and Northern Sweden. The Sami people, and Vancouver is the only home that I've known. I have been thinking so much in preparation for our time today, and it would I could not continue today without recognizing that today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It is a day that is recognized by the United Nations, and it is the beginning of 16 days of activism that we host every year to redress gender-based violence. And in thinking about the urban economy, there is no way to kind of get at the heart of the matter without recognizing the role of the making of Canada as a nation, and to the extent to which colonization has created the economies in the way that we understand them, but also the ways that it is structured to exclude and to, by systematic barriers, exclude many people. And that it isn't so much about being left out as to be excluded from. And so in looking at COVID-19 and the challenge, we're in this moment of reckoning with what has been some of a global acknowledgement of the effects of colonization and the enslavement of Africans. And with the killing of George Floyd in June, we began to unpack the extent to which racist and white supremacist inequity and ideology is embedded in all of the structures, not only in Europe and in the United States, but right here in Canada. And in thinking about economic recovery and what a post-COVID-19 could entail, it's not lost on me also that that we're in this time because of the COVID-19 as a zoonotic event with a species of this virus that then is transferred between species. And so it is this convergence of the history and the economies that has revealed the challenging and problematic and troubling underbelly of the making of many of the structures that we become so familiar with, and the economy is at the center of that. And so I've been, and some of the work that we've been doing through Battered Women's Support Services, and also in my role as co-chair of Feminists Deliver, is really unpacking the gendered impacts from an intersectional point of view, which is where we're really understanding the social, structural ways in which gender has been in effect in the impacts of COVID-19. And we have seen that in part of the way that women and women's work with respect to the caring economies, the way and the work in the private realm. What my colleagues have talked about so well is this kind of example of the split between the public in terms of the urban economy and the private, which is where we are now, and which has been the bastion of women. Part of what feminism was about was to bring, to redress the effects of colonization in effect, and to have women having a space not only in the home, but outside of the home. And in so many ways, under COVID-19, we have taken a step backwards in fairly significant ways, and where gender equity is returned to some of the return back and turn back some of the advances that we've made. And we're seeing that for sure, with the amounts of gender-based violence that are reported from our colleagues that are doing frontline work within transition houses and crisis lines all across the lands, not only here in Canada, but certainly US and in Europe. And we became aware of the ways in which the return and the incredible isolation within the home was going to create the conditions for increased subjugation for women in the home. And so the job losses that we've seen as well have affected women. Women historically and contemporary ways have been in service roles and in caring roles. And in those roles, that kind of employment is a glue that holds our society together. It's remarkable the ways in which the work that women do, whether it's paid work, and so much of the work that women do is unpaid. And so the notion of economy is also about these informal economies and reckoning with what is defined as a formal economy with respect to has a dollar value assigned to it, and what are those tasks and that labor that is undertaken, of which there is no monetary value, but has extraordinary social value. And the recovery is, and that term I find it's complicated to think about this idea of a recovery, because in a sense, it's asking us to return to some kind of baseline. The term recovery could be considered problematic in a way, if we are thinking about a transformation. And the notion of the pandemic, of the plague, as a portal to another way, which is to say that it would not be a recovery, rather it would be a transformation. And so we are in a really challenging moment in reckoning with, in a real way, the structural inequities, the ways in which the formal economy has been excluding, the effects of COVID-19 in redressing gender equity, and combined with the ways in which racial and economic injustice has been baked into our societies. And so part of what we've been doing, certainly at Battery Support Service, but also at Feminist Deliver, is joining with feminist thinkers, intersectional feminist thinkers all across the lands, and wanting to see what that transformation could unfold. But it really does mean confronting some of the ideas that we've had that have been troubling and problematic, and have structured out something transformative. And we are on a planet with finite resources. Some of what I think we haven't necessarily reckoned with is to what extent the adaptations that we're making at this moment are taking us back in the amount of waste that's being generated in this adaptation, to prevent transmission of the virus. And we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity. And my biggest concern is that if we leave it to traditional ways of moving through a challenge like this, we could be in the place of not only returning, but entrenching troubling structural inequities. And so the plague, the pandemic as a portal, is it's vitally necessary that we decenter the structural frame that we've worked from to this point, and to build equity into the system from the bottom. And I believe in the people. I believe in the people in that, which is to say that it wouldn't necessarily be government solely, and nor would it be business, that it would be about communities. And with the urban setting being so profoundly impacted, and how we're all in our houses, and we're seeing increasing homelessness outside of our houses. The streets are looking quite different in terms of who is actually outside on the street, and the underground economy that's existing within folks that are houseless. This is a pivotal time for us to take a look at and hope that we can imagine a transformation that would increase gender equity and bake in racial justice and build economies that are transformative rather than a recovery. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Angela. I think that's given us a lot to think about in terms of the relationship between what we describe as the economy and the society we live in, and really questioning where those boundaries lie. So thank you. Next up, Wade Grant, who's already welcomed us here. Wade is Intergovernmental Relations Manager with the Musqueam Nation, and really the Musqueam Nation is now a crucial economic actor in our region, as well as the host nation for a lot of what happens in Vancouver. So over to you, Wade.
Well, thank you once again. Thank you everybody else for the words that you've shared tonight, giving us a lot to think about as we move forward. For me in Musqueam, I really want to, in order to think about where we're going in the future, we have to reflect on the past and reflect on how we got to where we are and how we got to this economy of where we are. And for 9,000 years, story. I actually have two children here too, so you'll be seeing one of them jumping out right now. So for 9,000 years, we've lived in this territory. Up until about 150 years ago, we lived here in concert with our Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh brothers, and having the bounty of the Fraser River as one of our lifelines. We could hunt and in the forests where UBC now stands. That was our life. We all understand how beautiful the city of Vancouver is, and we've lived where we are for thousands of years, and it still really surprises me, but maybe not. It shouldn't surprise me that the majority of Vancouverites don't even know where Musqueam is. Still, they don't know that the Musqueam Reservation is actually still within the city boundaries of the community, because we are sitting on 0.02% of land that we call our traditional territory. We live on a small reservation just south of Southwest Marine Drive, right near the mouth of the Fraser River. Now, when we're talking about barriers that were put up to for our governments and our other people in this community to benefit from the bounty of the lands, a lot of those barriers are put up to Indigenous peoples like the Musqueam people. We look at the reservation system that put us down here. We look at the residential school system where our children were taken away. My child who just walked by, if he was born 50 years ago, he wouldn't be in my house right now. He'd be at a residential school that was run by a church probably hundreds of kilometers away. In order for us it wasn't just about taking our land away, it was about taking our culture, our language, our histories away. And, we were always out of sight, out of mind. We were put on a small reservation because we were told we wouldn't need land. We live near the Fraser River, which is going to be sustaining us into the future. We could fish there as long as we wanted. And of course, as time moved on, people realized the resource and the economic resource that this fishery was. They started banning us from fishing in our own river, and they wanted to teach us how to be farmers. They leased a lot of our land on the reservation to Chinese market gardeners that were here up until the 1980s. And I bring that up because it's very important and a very important part of my life. Because I don't know if many of you look at me and you probably say, well, he doesn't look 100% First Nations. Well, I'm not. I'm a descendant of a Chinese immigrant as well who lived on these lands. He came and worked on these gardens that were used to provide a bit of economic opportunity for the Musqueam people. My grandfather, Gordon Hong, was a farmer, and as we moved along, he became an important part of this community. I was never able to meet him, unfortunately, but those connections to who we are and those connections to the Chinese community never were severed. And it's an important part of who we are. It's an important part of the story as we're moving forward. So over the years, the Musqueam people never gave up hope, never relented in the ability for us to say, we still live in our community. We're still here. Our lands were never given up, and we still want acknowledgement of the real estate economy that has grown up around the city of Vancouver. So Musqueam was one of the very first First Nations to move forward with litigation on the Constitution of Canada to recognize our rights, to recognize that we still have rights that were never extinguished by the Canadian or provincial governments. One of those rights being the fishing rights. And in 1991, we won a Supreme Court of Canada case that recognized that we still have the Aboriginal right to fish for food, social, and ceremonial purposes in the Fraser River. That was an important case that started the momentum towards title and rights cases across the province of British Columbia. Remember, there has never been a treaty signed in most of British Columbia. There's a few treaties signed on lower Vancouver Island, and Treaty 8 extends into northeastern British Columbia. So we fast forward to the early 2000s, and Musqueam has gone to court a number of times saying we still have a right, we still have title to lands that were taken away from us. We either start negotiating or we have to litigate again. So Musqueam have now successfully started to negotiate returns of land to our people. And we call it returning land. And we don't like when people say the land is given to us by the Crown, because it was never taken from us by the Crown. So the land is being returned. We had a opportunity to return some lands in UBC in 2008. But unfortunately, as we move forward, we have seen the government still playing games with our negotiations, and the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh have come together to start the MST Corporation to ensure that our economy goes ahead in a positive way. But we have to buy our lands back. And that's a big sticking point for our community members, is that the lands that you hear about Jericho or Fairmont across the city of British Columbia, those weren't given to the Musqueam people, those weren't given to the Squamish people, those weren't given to the Tsleil-Waututh people. We've actually had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to have those lands returned to us. And as we move forward, we wanted to have these lands returned to us, not just for an economic reason. We wanted to have these returned to us because we want to start becoming part of the greater economy, but also the greater community, providing opportunities for us to build. Yes, because the only economy that we can actually tap into, the only resource that we really have to tap into is real estate in the city of Vancouver. We don't live in a rural setting where we can benefit from mining or forestry, and the fishery has pretty much died. So real estate is where Musqueam and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh would like to start benefiting, but providing benefits to the greater community. We know what it's like to be left out. We know what it's like to be forgotten. We want to make sure that any development that we move forward provides that reset and understanding how we can be providing for not just somebody that can afford a large condominium, but provide those people social housing that's desperately needed, rental housing that's desperately needed across this city. And that's going to become even more desperately needed as we move outside of this pandemic. My friend Chancellor from the Squamish Nation, he speaks about what they're doing at Sanok and how much they're going to provide way more social housing units than have been provided in the city in many decades. And they're also looking at the environmental impacts of development. They look at that as a place where, it's almost a no-car zone, because they've only put in a couple dozen parking spots in that development there. But we're also not just developing to with the government, we look at our friends across the river, and I look at Tamara Vrooman, who's in here with me today. The Musqueam have really, I think, set a precedent moving forward with her predecessor, Craig Richmond, with the Vancouver Airport agreement, our friendship agreement, recognizing that the Musqueam are within a stone's throw away from the Vancouver International Airport, but have never benefited from what happens over there. And we've signed a friendship agreement. It's allowing for employment for our community members, allowing for us to be a part of that economy over there. And I know that Tamara is going to be meeting with our leadership over the next number of years to ensure that we become more of a presence in our traditional territory at the airport. Which brings us to today and the pandemic and what we're doing about it. As many of you know, or may have seen, the Musqueam people have almost shut down our community because we are really wanting to be safe and secure, not just for our people, but for our elders and our children. Our elders are our history holders. Our elders are people that hold those connections to who we are for thousands of years. And we still have in our memory the effects of the smallpox epidemic that was unleashed upon First Nations people across this province. We're providing for our communities. Our chief and council provides grocery delivery to elders and band members. They're providing masks to all band members, whether they're on and off reserve. For off reserve people, if you can't get the groceries, they're providing gift cards so you can go get the groceries, because we want people to stay home. We want them because we're, like we said, we're still a small community, and we have multi-generational housing. We have grandsons and granddaughters living with great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers, and when they come home, we don't want those great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers to be infected. So we have road checks on each of our communities as we move forward, and I think that this is, and we've created education pods in our community. For those families that don't want to send their kids to school, we have volunteers in our community here. Every day, our children are going down to our rec center where their education pods are being provided. But we're not the only ones that are providing for our communities. I'm lucky enough to sit on the First Nations Health Council as well. And we're doing our best to provide for the 203 First Nations across the province of British Columbia. And I wanted to loop back to that connection I said I have of my Chinese family, those connections that we don't want to lose and we actually want to strengthen. Because of my connection with that family, I know people that are distributors of these masks, and we were able to provide 60,000 medical masks to First Nations in rural and remote communities across the province of British Columbia, which is something that has been welcomed by our community members. But we're also, because of the pandemic, we're seeing a spotlight shone on a lot of things that still need to be done, that still need to be rectified. Over the summer, many people may have seen the press conference where our health minister talked about racism in the medical system. We've all known that it's been happening, but now we have a spotlight on it because of the media. And I wanted to close on the epidemic not just being about COVID-19. We all know that Indigenous people make up a large disproportionate population of downtown East Side, people that are living below the poverty line, and people that are substance abuse, that are dying at an exponential rate from the opioid crisis. And we're trying to ensure that we not only provide for our people that are suffering in the COVID, but the opioid crisis has blown up in our communities as well. So we're looking and we're planning and we're moving forward, taking lessons from our elders and our ancestors who lived through the Spanish flu, through the smallpox epidemic, and through our leaders as we try to ensure that we keep our communities safe. And when I say communities safe, I don't just mean Musqueam, I mean the city of Vancouver and all the municipalities surrounding. I know I've taken a little bit more than 5 minutes, but like I said, it's hard to sum up 9,000 years of history in 5 minutes. So I'll do my best to shorten it next time. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Wade. And no need to cram 9,000 years into 9 minutes. That would be superhuman. Our final speaker this evening is Tamara Vrooman, who I'm sure is known to many people in terms of her relatively new role as the Chancellor of Simon Fraser University. Probably also known well to people here for her role with Vancity Credit Union, but specifically here tonight, speaking as the CEO of the Vancouver Airport, which I should say is a local public agency. It's an authority that we, in some sense, all collectively own together, and clearly a key point of connection between the urban economy and the rest of the world, and in a certain sense on the front line of the pandemic. But I, of course, say that hesitantly because we know that it's in fact our care workers who really are on the front line. But welcome, very nice to have you with us. Over to you, Tamara.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to my colleagues. It's been a real pleasure to hear your thoughtful reflections of where we collectively find ourselves and where we need to go going forward. And Wade, specifically to you, thank you for welcoming us to the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I am with you tonight from YVR, which is on Sea Island, and as you mentioned, on the unceded territory. And we have a deep and lasting relationship with Musqueam, friendship and sustainability agreement that was signed 3 years ago that I'll speak about in a few minutes, because we certainly see it as an essential part of our role and our recovery going forward. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about YVR and how it fits into our dialogue this evening, but I can't resist talking a little bit about Vancity Credit Union, given that I was there for 13 years as CEO, and given that the origins of our local community credit union, which bears the name of our city, so it's decidedly tied to the urban environment in which it operates. But it all came out of a recovery effort of a fairly large, major global crisis called the Second World War. And it came as a locally based solution to solve the problems of inequality that people saw at that time. So Vancity Credit Union was established in 1946, right after the Second World War, by a group of 14 people who each contributed $22, coming largely from the east side of our city. And they were ordinary people, you know, they were nurses, they were commissioned salespeople, they were fishermen, they were tradespeople, they were stay-at-home community, stay-at-home folks, as well as people who are active in the community in social work and community support. And they came together because they were just regular people who wanted to have a little bit of an opportunity to have a quieter period and to rebuild their lives and their communities and their families and the economy. And they chose to live on the east side of our city, east of Main Street. And they found that they couldn't get a mortgage from any one of the big 5 banks, not because the banks didn't know how to lend. Of course, they absolutely did, but they thought that that community would be worthless. That after the war, you know, there's other places to put their money on the other parts of the city, and that nobody'd want to live there, build a business there, raise a family there. In short, it was high risk. So those 14 people came together and contributed $22 in 1946 to start Vancouver City Savings Credit Union, which was all about doing for one another and having local control and democratic control of economic independence, inclusion, and recovery. They wouldn't have used those words at the time. They used the words of self-actualization and mutuality and cooperation, but they're absolutely the principles. And I happen to think I'm privileged to lead that organization, as I said, for 13 years. It's been transformational in our city. It's not an accident that the largest community-based credit union in the world, Vancity, is located in Vancouver. And while there's lots more to do, and we're going to talk about that this evening, you know, the principles of inclusion and equality meant that organization was the first in the country to lend to women without requiring a man to go sign the loan in late 1960s. I think it was the first. We were the first, certainly, to be carbon neutral in North America, the first to be a living wage employer 8 years ago before the rest, and the first private sector organization to, and certainly the first financial institution in the country to adopt reconciliation as a core value. So I think it's an interesting model. You know, it was what's old is new again. When you think about it, a credit union really is crowdfunding just without the technology. And so there are examples of where we have, coming out of crisis, worked together from the community to establish the principles of transformation on our own terms and built really quite lasting and resilient institutions. So as a hopefully a little modicum of hope as we think about the challenges in front of us, I offer that example right here in our backyard. And in terms of YVR, I chose to come to YVR for similar reasons. You know, an airport is on the one hand, it's just a place where places take off and land, but it's actually so much more than that. You know, at our core, we are a people business. We employ about 26,000 people here on Sea Island and at YVR. So we are sort of a small city in and of ourselves. And while many of us experience the airport as passengers, and we're going to see friends and family, we're maybe making important medical trips for medical treatment, or we're having new experiences either through business or through travel, we think about it in terms of connecting people. And we absolutely are a locally controlled, not-for-profit private corporation. We are accountable ultimately to the community. You know, nobody builds an airport as an end unto itself. We exist for the sole purpose of serving the community and the economy that supports it. We have had been on definitely the pointy end of the economic dislocation as an organization, although we are privileged to have resources that allow us to maintain employment, maintain benefits, and maintain some of the highest health, COVID, and safety standards in the world. But just to give you a sense, today, I just checked the numbers today, we are at 16% of the traffic volume that we would have had precisely 365 days ago. So it is a pretty profound change. And one of the things we think a lot about is coming out of the crisis. You know, it's an opportunity to, not very often do you have an opportunity as a business leader and as somebody who's accountable for the region and thinks about our role in terms of supporting the kind of region we want going forward, where you have to take a couple of steps back, examine everything you do in order to take that bigger step forward. And certainly our industry has been laggards, frankly, when it comes to climate, when it comes to sustainability. We've made some progress here at YVR, but there's definitely more we can do. And this gives us an opportunity to really make investments with key partners like our colleagues Musqueam, as well as Metro Vancouver and others, about how to create sustainable energy distribution, as well as to lower our overall footprint in terms of operating aviation. But the other thing is we also need to do our part for the distribution and the support of health. And so certainly we have taken our unused assets. We have a large parking lot, as you might imagine, where there's no cars now, long-term parking. And we have leased that to the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority. It is the largest drive-through COVID testing facility in the province. And we do that as part of our support for community to make sure that people have access. It's close to transit, it's obviously drive-through, to make sure that there's ready access. So we're not just a connection point for planes and people taking trips. We're also a connection point for so much more in our community. We're well connected with public transit, thanks to the Canada Line. And we're doing more work to think about electronically operated, battery operated barges that can go up and down the Fraser to connect to other points in our region. The other thing about an airport is that the highest value goods, including people, of course, travel by air. And what many people don't know is that a lot of cargo, particularly relating to things related to health, medicine, I can tell you I've had probably more than half a dozen calls in the last week asking if there are facilities at YVR that can store at -70 degrees as people think about the storage and distribution of vaccines. And so we also serve as a connection point to the ecosystem of our region and our province. You know, a vaccine doesn't go from Seoul, Korea, directly to Prince George. It comes to YVR and then it connects to Prince George. So having a hub that is connected, well functioning, thinking about the region, as well as the international connections is vital. And we need to do that in a way that leads in terms of health. We need to do that in a way that leads in terms of our partners and service to community. And we need to do that in a way that leads with respect to climate. One of the things that is one of the best kept secrets, I would say, at the moment, because not very many people are traveling by air, is the experience at the airports. And we're also doing our part. We launched a test, rapid test on Monday in partnership with WestJet for those who have to travel to be able to take a rapid COVID test. It's free and available to anybody who wishes to take it on a domestic flight, gets a 15-minute result. And part of that is we would like to understand what that means to travel, but part of that is we think we've designed it in such a way that it could be replicated in other contexts, community, education, and so on, should the government decide that that's required. So we are a place that absolutely is about the movement of planes, but we are at our heart really a place that's centered around people, our ability to serve the community, make sure that connections are made, important connections for family and culture and business, but also important connection for goods and vital services that are increasingly need to be made available in an equitable and distributed way, not only for our region, but the other urban regions throughout the province.
Great, thank you very much, Tamara. Well, thanks to all the panelists for those opening remarks. I think we'd like to take a few minutes to have a little bit of discussion between the panel. Between the panelists. And to get that started, I'd like to pose a sort of an overall question and ask you to react to the question and to each other in response to that. I think one of the themes that's cut across a lot of most of the presentations really is the question of the infrastructure that supports the economic life of the city. And I'd like to take a few minutes to ask the panel to reflect upon what forms of infrastructure should governments, communities, local governments, public agencies, and the private sector, what kinds of infrastructure should we be thinking about and emphasizing and putting our main attention on as we think about a recovery that isn't just a replication of the patterns that got us into this crisis. And maybe I'll put the spotlight to Matti first and ask him to jump in on that one, because I do know that he works in the infrastructure field. It also seems fair to put the academic on the spot. So Matti, if you could kick us off on that particular topic.
Sure. Infrastructure is the backbone of our communities. It is what enables it enables us to do all the other things that are important to us. And I think Tamara really highlighted this when she spoke about the role of an airport. The airport is a throughput. It's a place that allows connections. And I think infrastructure provides the foundations for strong, sustainable, and equitable communities. So let me just drill down into that a little bit further to talk about the types of infrastructure that I think are going to be foundational. First of all, around transportation and mobility. One of the things that we've seen here in Toronto, and I think has been similar in Vancouver, is that the pace of change, when we talk about projects that have historically been extremely controversial, like bike lanes or bus lanes, we need to think about how we transform our transportation systems to enable them to be more equitable, to enable people to move around and have access more quickly. And I would say in particular in the inner suburbs, what we've highlighted is that many of the debates and discussions we have are in the downtown cores. They're about, should we put bike lanes on Burrard or on Davie or or on Robson, or here in Toronto on the Danforth. In the neighborhood where I live here in Toronto, a bike lane was first proposed for the Danforth and Bloor in the year 2000. And just 2 months ago, it was implemented within 2 weeks and very little debate and discussion. And so we've seen that we can move much faster with the types of infrastructure that enable mobility and especially non-motorized mobility. We need to now focus on the inner suburbs where we've seen the highest numbers of COVID cases, where people are typically lower income, more racialized communities, and where people and newcomer communities. So that's one. I think we can move very quickly on how we enable people to move around our cities. That provides greater equity and greater sustainability. The second point is around electrification in both our transportation system and our housing stock. We need to be thinking about how we retrofit buildings and retrofit our existing transit systems and transportation networks so that they enable people to move and enable us to produce less greenhouse gas emissions. We're seeing that in the last number of months, Tesla, just as one example, has become essentially one of the most valued companies in the world, and the biggest, the most highly valued automaker, even though they produce relatively few vehicles compared to their counterparts. The reason is because of electrification, because there's a sense now that the ball is now rolling on electrification, and there's a sense that that is going to pick up as we try to respond to climate change, but also the local environmental impacts of air pollution from gas-powered engines. And finally, I think we need to start rethinking the caring infrastructure of our cities. Infrastructure is often thought of as the wires, the cables, the pipes, the sewers, and the transportation lines and transit lines. We can do so much better than that, and think about the broader caring economies and the broader caring infrastructure, like our long-term care homes, which have just had devastation through the pandemic, and think about how we provide better and safer and more livable conditions for people who are living them and for the people who are working there. So how the people who are working there, and give them the pay and the dignity of a safe job. I think that is part of rebuilding our infrastructure. I want to just come back to transit for 1 second, because I think we often think about mega projects when we think about transit. And in your region, you're talking about SkyTrain lines and subway lines along in Surrey and along the Broadway corridor. And here we talk about subways and whatnot. I think we could focus on buses and roll out a dramatic increase in our bus network, have them be electrified, and enable us to roll that out very quickly into our suburban communities to really help drive some of the accessibility, to address some of the accessibility challenges that we've been facing, and achieve issues of environmental sustainability and greater social equity.
Great, thanks, Matti. I think Angela's ready to jump in, and then I turn to other members of the panel.
Yeah, thank you. I do think a lot about the role of social enterprise in this case in infrastructure, and how we can develop an economy that has like a circle economy, where we're being able to imagine this, the caring economy, the enterprise, and building social equity and responding to social needs while generating money, but also having the same important consideration to humans. And so I appreciate Tamara's comments also about Vancity, because Vancity for so long was supporting co-ops and thinking about co-ops and building that kind of way of supporting economies, but also if we're looking at infrastructure, I would hope that that we could imagine building social enterprise into that. It wouldn't, the thought about returning or entrenching what we've seen historically, which has been troubling for many people, if we could think about social enterprise and co-ops as one way of imagining, sustaining infrastructure and building infrastructure, and then of course everything that that Matti said with respect to the caring economy and the reality that the care homes and the role of organizations like ours in terms of the shadow pandemic and the necessity to bring that caring piece to the forefront, because at the end of the day, it is about, I would hope, building that capacity for us while we're building infrastructure.
Could I add
Please.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, I really appreciate those comments, Angela and Matti. And I think when we think about infrastructure, what is the purpose of infrastructure? Well, the purpose of infrastructure, I think, is around mobility, access, and equality. And so we think about mobility in terms of pieces of infrastructure like mine, and certainly with respect to transit and other things we've talked about. But access is important as well. So one of the other roles I have in the community is I chair the Rick Hansen Foundation board. And so thinking about accessibility in terms of who goes where and at what cost is a key part. We haven't also talked about digital infrastructure and the ability to participate in the services that Lynsey talks about requires digital access at, frankly, an affordable cost. And while we're very connected, we're not always connected in a way that's accessible. And therefore, access to capital, something we often don't think about as a key piece of infrastructure, and who has control and access of money, as well as roads, as well as digital infrastructure, as well as airports, is vital to the movement and the connection that we see in an urban environment that helps create well-being and wealth in the total definition of that word. And so if we don't have infrastructure that thinks about connectivity, mobility, access, and equality, it's we come up with these partial solutions where we have this awesome transit infrastructure that people can't access, or we have this awesome 5G network that nobody can afford, or we have this beautiful airport that isn't connected sustainably to the community that it serves, or we have all of those, but we have such gross inequality in our communities that people don't have access to capital to be able to connect those things to create independence and livelihood for themselves, their families, and their community.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Tamara. I completely agree. Internet and connectivity would be the one that we see the most now. As an employer, who employs hundreds of people in BC in often remote locations, and intends to hire many hundreds more, and the business owners that we're supporting as well. The access to connectivity, whether it be in a remote location or an underserved area of the city that has old infrastructure. Like, this is it's not a nicety anymore. It is a basic public necessity that is just part of everyday life, and we will never go back from that. This is one of these huge digitization pushes where decades has happened in months here, from a societal digitization perspective, and the infrastructure has to be there to support that.
I don't know whether any of the other panelists want to jump in right now.
I mean, it's Wade. I
Please.
can't really add much, but I'm just sitting here and I'm looking across the street at my house, and there's an elderly woman, an elder in our community. She lives on her own most of the time, and it has health issues. And our nearest bus stop to Musqueam is a 15-minute walk if you're able-bodied. She has, so, you know, the only time she ever gets to a health clinic is when she calls the ambulance. I've seen her ambulance out there on a weekly basis. And, you know, it's just, you know, that we say we have a world-class transit system, but for us, we've never actually had it down here. And I look at things from our perspective because like I said, we've been out of sight, out of mind. Did you know that the largest sewage plant, a sewage pipe, runs directly under our reservation, and it's 70 years old? And I know that they're going to be doing some upgrading, but that's always been an issue with the Musqueam people. We never gave that land away again. They just took it. They built a 2 meters deep a sewage plant. So how do we reconcile that as well? The infrastructure being, we have a very, very old sewage system running under our city, and people don't even know about those types of things as well, which a lot of people in our community feel like is detrimental to the health of our community members. So working with Metro Vancouver as they start to retrofit the plant across our river, right? You can see it from almost my house. So those types of things are important to Musqueam.
Thank you for that. And actually, Wade, that picks up on the next question I'd like to put to the panel. Before I get there, I do just want to say that I really appreciated the way the panel expanded the concept of infrastructure to go from roads and sewers to including digital pipelines, to including new organizational forms. And I think that we might come back to that in the questions in just a few minutes. The place I wanted to go was just something that really came through strongly in many of your presentations is this idea that the home is becoming a place and a site of the economy in new ways and in unexpected ways. And it seems to me that that's really going to shift the boundaries potentially of what we understand as the economy. And several panelists made comments about home and work going into the home, and of course the ever-present possibilities in terms of real estate development. So I'd love to hear from the panel a little bit about this question of the role that home plays in the post-COVID economy.
I can go. The home, you know, the idea of the private-public split is actually a mighty important thing for us to keep in mind. And we haven't started to, we have to recognize that houselessness is a major problem in urban settings all across, Europe and Canada and the United States. And so the idea of a house is, and the way that, it's a big deal. And even the amount of criminalization that we're seeing of people that don't have homes, and for all of the reasons, whether it's mental health or whether it's poverty. I see homelessness just in the United States. It's just going through it's unbelievable, the amount of houselessness that's there. And so that's one thing, and thinking about the home, and what are we calling a home? The second piece is then in recognition that the home historically has been a place of subjugation for women, and so we're retreating to that in lots of ways in present day, and so we have to begin to irrigate that wound in a sense and kind of expose it. That right now there is extraordinary amounts of challenge for women in the amount of extra labor that is happening through, without childcare, supporting children with schooling, doing their job, and of course maintaining all of the things that were happening before. So we haven't really taken much time to explore that consequence right now in terms of us being in the home. And we should examine the home now as the place as the workplace. And there should be attention paid to that, and a lot of time paid to that. I appreciate that Lynsey, her team decided, no, we're not going back to a built site again. We will be working from our home. I don't think we've got there yet to think about that. And in thinking about that, we have to remember that the home has been a place of subjugation for women, in terms of, it's only been in recent years where we've been able to really look at the role of violence against women, and the home is the battleground.
Great, thank you.
I guess the only thing I might add to that, Peter, is in our region in particular, we know that access to home is among the least equal in the world, and not only just in terms of affordability, but also just in terms of access, houselessness, as Angela just talked about. So it's a confounding issue, right? Where we have the blurring of the public and the private, with a significant portion that don't have an actual choice in that. And so what does that mean about how we make those decisions? And I absolutely appreciate the decision that employers have made for people to work from home for all the reasons we've talked about. And for employers like Shopify, who are, I'm absolutely positive, a living wage employer and then some, that's maybe not the same kind of issue. But for other workers and other employers, it absolutely is. And so we make these assumptions that I worry about with respect to what it means with respect to true access and equality.
Peter, can I add one other point? I completely agree with what's been said. And I think the pandemic is causing us and forcing us to rethink the types of development that has been happening in our cities. If I think of my memory of Vancouver and knowledge of what's happening now with just the rapid construction of many high-rise buildings with one bedrooms or bachelor suites, as small as they can build them, and the units have been getting smaller and smaller over the years. And the same patterns have been happening here and in Toronto. And the thought process has been in recent years that the unit can get smaller because people are going to use restaurants as their dining room, and they're going to use the public realm as their living room, and they're going to be out and about so much, and they're going to be out working and out fraternizing, and they don't really need a big space at home. And because of that, not only have the units gotten smaller, but in many cases, where we've struggled and what's becoming clearer is that we haven't provided the public spaces, the parks that people need to have. If you're in a very small space, the public spaces have to be excellent in order to enable that type of lifestyle to be truly livable. And the pandemic has really brought that that into the front of mind. And I think the moment now requires us to think about not just the units that are being built themselves, but also the public spaces. And here in Toronto, and I think the same as in Vancouver, the parks have been among the unsung heroes of the pandemic, as people use those spaces in all sorts of different and creative ways. I mean, you see people using parks as their gym now. You see people using parks as their meeting space now. You see people so they can do it outdoors and do it at a safe remove from other people. And Vancouver is blessed with natural wild spaces, natural spaces to go to. But the way we build our public realm is ever so important. And I think we're going to start seeing a much greater focus on that as part of city building and as part of the development process of our cities.
Great, thanks, Matti. I wonder if Lynsey or Wade want to weigh in on this one.
Yeah, for us, I think one of the things we were extremely conscious about from an employee perspective is many of our team members are living in one-bedroom apartments. I myself am in a one-bed in the West End. You live in fear of this door behind you, since that BBC segment with the little one coming in. So everybody has now suddenly this crazy mix of a view into people's lives from a colleague perspective that you never had. Suddenly you're seeing people's dogs on a daily basis, their children, etc. So it's created a really strange blur between home and work life, and some of that is wonderful, and some of it is pretty awful, because now people are associating their bedroom with work, which is never a psyche that really existed in that same way before, apart from those who've been working remotely long term, like myself. So I do think it's changed people's relationship with their home, and it remains to be seen what the long term effects are of all of this. Of course, right now, what we're seeing is a lot of people attempting to move out of their one bed apartments because they simply can't have a couple having confidential work conversations if they're living in a loft apartment and there's no walls between them. And so it's definitely putting pressure on individuals, and once you add children into the mix there and have them running around all day when you're trying to work and you've got two parents trying to work, we're lucky from an employer perspective that we have the scope and ability to give parents a lot of leeway in terms of the types of hours that they work and being able to accommodate what they need to show up. But not every business is necessarily in a position to be able to do that, and that puts people in really, really tricky situations at home.
Great, thanks.
Wait. Well, I can't, like I said, I can't add, but what Lindsey was saying, I guess you saw my son running back and forth behind me. That happens on a daily basis. At first I thought, oh, well, I can get all my work done here. But when you have people have access to you to have a meeting any hour, every hour. I've been on Zoom calls since 8 or 7:30 this morning, and I've been nonstop. There's something called Zoom fatigue that people keep calling about. I'm not complaining one bit, but there's something about human interaction that I really miss. And being able to meet people face to face is a lot better than staring at a screen. And I don't like seeing my own face on the screen all the time either. I'm very self-conscious about those types of things. But it's been a long time since I've had being able to have a meeting privately, but I'm dealing with what I have at the moment.
Great, thanks very much. So I think we're at the stage where we've got some questions lining up from the audience. I'm going to ask Meg and or Aphrodite to call on some of our members of the audience to ask their questions.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So we've got a bunch of questions. I want to turn first to Mayed Hediatafard, who is asking a question about systems of cities and implications that I think will be really interesting. Mayed, do you want to ask your question? You should
Hello,
be able
everyone.
to unmute.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your interesting discussions. I have a question about the economic system of cities and the diversification of economic sectors in the cities and its role in the adaptability of cities to the changes. If so, we will probably face new hierarchy of cities according to the different combination of economic sectors. And then I would like to know if there is any study about the role of this diversification into the adaptability of cities, and then if so, if this happens, which sectors are gaining value and potential to develop better, and which cities or which combination of different sectors or services can resist better to this situation of crisis, and what are the implications for the planning system to do that? Thank you very much.
That's great, thank you, Mede. I'm not sure who'd like to take that up. It's really a question about what are the benefits of economic diversification in response to this kind of crisis, and also how to move in a more diversified direction going forward.
Yes.
Peter, Peter, I feel like you would actually be the best person to answer that. I don't know if that conflicts with your chair role and moderator role. I mean, I can take a sort of I guess academic crack at it first, and then others can certainly jump in. I mean, I think what we've seen is that, you know, over the last 9 months, essentially the snow globe has been shaken up. Is one way to think about it. And we're now starting to see where things are going to fall. And cities are really in a moment of jockeying for what is going to come next. I mean, we had an old hierarchy. There were models of you know, world cities and that had over time become quite detailed. But those are now being shaken up for a whole host of reasons, some of which have to do with global geopolitics. Some of them have to do with the pandemic itself, and some of them have to do with these other intersecting crises of climate change and systemic inequality and structural racism. And I think what you're seeing is that the cities that are going to respond best and the cities that are going to have the brightest future are those, first of all, that have economies that are based around bringing on board new, clean, green solutions. And you're seeing, you know, around electrification, and that can be both tech and also old ideas about how we address issues of climate change. So that's one area. We're seeing another one, and Tamara alluded to this earlier, is around finance and how do we finance the transformations that need to happen. So you could see a whole host of, just like was mentioned around Vancity coming out of the Second World War, you could see a whole new set of financial institutions that engage in things like environmental retrofits and financing the next generation of climate positive solutions. And I would say that are overlaid also with social inclusion, because what we saw, you know, in the spring is that when you have moments of dislocation and great inequality and these issues of anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism being front and center, that also has a knock-on effect on our cities and their abilities to function and their abilities to create new economic ideas. And so I think the cities that are going to thrive are those that come up with solutions that address the public health crisis, the climate change crisis, and the issue and make the hardest push at addressing systemic and structural inequalities.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think what I would just say in building on that is that one of the traps of economic change is that it's very difficult to diversify when you're not diverse. It's very difficult to know what the next step is, and that is always a challenge in any kind of economy. And what the pandemic does do is it opens up the space within which public actors, private actors are willing to contemplate new possibilities. And so in some sense, the range of things we're willing to experiment with has gotten bigger. And, you know, let's at least grasp that. Let's try and take advantage of that as we move forward. I don't know if other members of the panel wanted to weigh in on that question of diversification. Otherwise, I'm going to ask.
I can just piggyback on what Matti said. Remember, Vancouver is in a very unique situation when it comes to being an urban center. There are two large or small reservations in the city of Vancouver. There's our reservation. Just a moment, baby. There's our reservation where I live on, and there's the Snock reservation underneath the Broad Street Bridge. And, you know, these are opportunities for us to finally be a part of the city. The Shaughnessy Golf Course, their lease is coming up in 2032. Over 150 acres coming back to the Musqueam on the reservation, the Snock development. But we're talking about the anti-Indigenous racism. But when we start to try to diversify, when we try to become part of the community, we're not doing it in the right way. We're all the people that complain about Indigenous people being too dependent on government. complain about the Indigenous people finally, diversifying or trying to become, trying to create a more diverse community. So, these are challenges we still have and we're trying to overcome. And I see this on a daily basis whenever there's an article about a new development that Squamish is doing. It's always a hodgepodge of people calling us just the worst names still. Yeah.
Thank you, Wade. Meg, Aphrodite, you want to call on the next question?
Sure, thank you, Peter. We have a question from Craig Jorgensen, and we can unmute your mic if you'd like to read your question about digital infrastructure.
Or he might have stepped away. Aphrodite, why don't you read it?
Okay, so the question is, the discussion of digital infrastructure brings to mind the impacts large portions of the internet going offline due to outages relating to AWS. How do we need to rethink core infrastructure going forward?
I can answer this. So AWS is Amazon Web Services, in case anybody's not familiar with that. Like the reality is the internet is propped up by a number of massive players. AWS is only one of them. And all of those people and companies are sort of background players to the services that we all use day in, day out, and probably most people are completely unaware of them. Every government and tech company has its projections for what it thinks internet usage growth is going to be, product usage growth is going to be, and they scale their services to be in line with that. For us, it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Every year we hit new highs for that, and the next year it just becomes a regular Tuesday. And so all of the tech companies that are dealing with high growth in the last 10 years have sort of a scale in which they operate and a scale at which they aspire to. And then of course COVID hits and it maxes out everybody's scale way beyond what they were expecting. If the average person spends 3-4 hours online prior to COVID, now they're online maybe 20 hours a day. Like it's huge. Like the disparity is absolutely off the charts, to the extent that nobody could have predicted this and built for it. So the train has just accelerated and the tracks are not built yet. And so back at the start of the pandemic, everybody was suddenly thinking, okay, scale and stability is like the number one thing that most companies were trying to adapt to actually be able to support. And a lot of companies have done an unbelievable job of pulling off certain elements of that, and they're still working on it today. Like it's an ever long problem for companies like us and Amazon and Google Cloud Services, etc. And I don't know that it's necessarily that we need to rethink core infrastructure. We just need to accept that we have seen a huge jump beyond where we ever thought we'd be at this point in 2020, based on the regular projections that we would have had in January of this year. And it's a kick up the ass really for all of these companies and the infrastructure that supports each of them, that we just need to think bigger than we ever have, because digital life has accelerated significantly.
Great, thank you.
Peter, the next question is from Callie Wong. Callie, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, thanks for taking my question. What kind of impact do you think that the new Biden administration's policy, for example, the focus on climate change, would that have on our post-COVID-19 urban economy? Thank you. Maybe Matti or Tamara wants to answer that?
I'm just going to say Musqueam has enough trouble with the provincial and federal government. I don't want to talk about the U.S. government.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at that. Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think the key the key difference will be a more transparent and predictable international engagement around climate from the United States. And so I think that some of the forces that we see underway in Asia and Europe, with some of the largest investment funds in the world committing to a GHG reduction lens in all of their investments, and certainly for pieces of large public infrastructure like ours, where people are making 30-year investments in bonds and debt instruments that support infrastructure like ours. We know that if you're thinking 30 years from now, you're probably thinking a lot about whether or not those organizations and those companies have thought about climate mitigation as part of the likelihood that you're going to get a return on that investment. So I think all of those forces, what we see with the Bank of England and the European Central Bank, are all pushing in the direction. I think what the Biden administration potentially does is provide some predictability out of the world's first or second largest economy, depending on any given day, which will be helpful, I think, to making solid and confident investment decisions that tackle climate.
Can I add one other thought to that, Peter, which is I think the incoming Biden administration, with their focus on what they're calling broadly the Green New Deal, I think this could actually shake Canada out of its complacency. I think relative to the last 4 years, we were seen as shining stars. But I think relative to who's coming in, and if they really get serious about this, this could shine a light on some of our flaws and some of our shortcomings and some of the places where we have great language, but we don't necessarily follow through. And I think if the Biden administration really gets serious on some of what's in those Green New Deal plans, and you start to see a wave of, for example, electric vehicle bylaws and regulations coming in across the United States, or you start to see major energy retrofit programs, that will shake us and require us to respond and keep pace, so that we don't then become seen as the laggards. And just one other thought is that actually in many ways cities have been way out ahead of their national governments. And David Miller, a former mayor of Toronto, has just recently written a book about this, if you're interested, called Solved, about all the climate solutions. But it really focuses and brings to bear that cities have been leaders for the longest time on this issue. And I think cities will continue, even at our national level. I think it could be much better with an incoming Biden administration, but I think our cities will still need to keep pushing and be at the forefront of tackling climate change. That's where most of the Canadian population lives. That's where most of the emissions are produced, and that's where I think the greatest solutions will be found.
Great, thank you. Do any other members of the panel want to weigh in on this one?
I guess my one comment would be is I struggle to think that the United States could turn that around so quickly. Actually, I guess to Wade's point, in terms of the struggle with government in general, and to the extent to which the United States economy is highly problematic in terms of anything around equity. So I'm thoughtful that this could, the Green New Deal, as it's loosely named, I struggle with that. But I'm always interested in how, to the extent to which we are looking to the United States for some kind of information about ourselves, and I would hope that, as that Canada could begin to imagine and be a leader in ways that we have never seen before. And on all these points, that wouldn't be to be thinking about what Biden's doing or not. I mean, I know we have to pay attention to United States for all the reasons that I don't need to explain here. However, as a measure for what we need to do as Canadians in Canada, I think I would like us to move away from that in imagining as transforming this moment.
Thank you. I think this is actually a good point to pick up on one of the questions that's in the chat. Anka, I'm going to read this on your behalf. But I think it does also speak to some of the uneven impacts and of the crisis, and how sometimes that can actually make it difficult for governments and for communities to pursue these new opportunities. And the question is this: I see young people in particular struggling in this pandemic. What are the thoughts of the panel on creating social infrastructure to support this group, particularly with respect to technological infrastructure? Thanks, Anka. We'd like to pick up on that one.
Well, I might maybe say to you, Peter, and Matti, at a minimum, and also in my capacity as the Chancellor of SFU, certainly our post-secondary institutions, I think, have a role to play, not just the research universities, but community colleges, institutes that are distributed, Indigenous post-secondary institutions that are distributed right across the country. And so technology connectivity is important, but I also think that the ability to verify data, to exchange and get access to good quality information and research, and build on ideas and thoughts that can be quite disempowering and fragmented in a social or solely digital platform that doesn't have the power of in the most positive sense, of an institution that's democratically run, that is transparent, that is able to make diverse connections and host seminars and sessions and podcasts like the very one that we're participating in today. So I think that technology without some support and infrastructure to it is just wires and platforms, and that really the social infrastructure that would come through, for example, an education context is vital. And it's really my hope that one of the transformational things that come out, whether it's in an urban environment or not, of the pandemic, is that post-secondary education and institutions and organizations play a more transformational role in putting research and facts into the hands of ordinary people in community, including young people, so they can make informed decisions about the future they want to create.
I really appreciate that. If I could, I wanted to just talk about Ethos Lab, which is a community-based response to what we're talking about right now, that is based in Surrey, that is supporting Black youth, specifically with experimenting with emerging technologies in order to transform and create solutions for us all. And community-based responses, I think, are vital here in addition to academia. And so a good thing to do, which I know Vancity has done with respect to Ethos Lab, is to invest in those community-based responses and to bring communities of youth together to organize themselves and to learn and grow and to dream. I feel so positive about the youth right now. As much as I understand there's all the struggle with the pandemic, and I appreciate the question because it's highlighting a portion of our population that is extraordinarily disenfranchised. There is so much wisdom there, and I feel so excited about the possibility for you. So if you get a chance to check out Ethos Lab as a model for one of the ways communities can support youth right now in building and transforming.
Yeah, something that's very heavily on our mind since the start of this is thinking about young people's first few years in work. You know, we're a heavy employer of interns. Right at the start of the pandemic, lots of companies opted to drop their intern program because their managers were not well equipped, or they didn't feel they were well equipped. They didn't feel confident to bring those people in and be able to give them the right level of care and an education that is required. You know, internships are an investment for a company, and they take work on both sides. So I think, you know, for companies who still have the option, it's not possible for all, but if you can still take your interns, please try. You know, these people are going to end up incredibly well equipped at building relationships digitally, potentially far better than the rest of us because of this experience. For some of them, they've never met their college you know, classmates in the way that the rest of us might have in university or whatever it might be. But it's this year and next year have the potential to throw so many high potential young people off course because they won't get the same types of opportunities in industry that they might have got in any sector of employment, and that's a real shame, you know. So call out to any company who can still bring in their interns. You have a better choice than you've ever had in market probably, and try your best if you can.
I think that's a really great point. There's clear evidence that people who graduate into a recession carry that throughout their working lives. Matti.
What I want to add is I think it's a moment for our universities and colleges to reflect on what our role is and to really see ourselves as anchor institutions, and to really start shifting our practice towards being engaged and bringing knowledge in the service of action. And so one of the institutions that we've created at the University of Toronto, just as an example, is the School of Cities, which is the organization that I'm the interim director of. And what we've done is in every turn in our research, in our education programming, and in our outreach, we require our participants from the university to have partners and collaborators from communities. And I use communities plural because it can be governments, it can be firms, it can be nonprofits, it can be community organizations. We require that at every turn, the partnership starts at the beginning, and it's not something that's bolted on at the end of a project that we come in and just share the results. And it's been a real transformation in how we think about doing urban scholarship in this case, that it's with communities, not for communities, and not doing studies on communities. And it's educational programming where the students get out and work with stakeholders starting much earlier at the undergrad level to design their own projects and come up with ways that they can collaborate with stakeholders in the public domain. And it's led to a whole new thinking on how a university engages and sees its role and impact. And I think we're seeing that across the country at universities. I think we're just at the beginning of a wave of an urgency of our institutions to land and be part of solutions in the cities in which they're based, and more widely connecting those solutions nationally and internationally as well.
Great, thank you. Any final questions, Meg, Aphrodite, from our audience?
There is a question. Maybe if Naomi Steinberg, I can tell you've got lots of great ideas. Is there a quick question that you can add just in our final moments here tonight?
There's so much. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been really inspiring. I think Vancouver's doing well with like permitting, pop-up plazas, and fast tracking things. And I'm just wondering if anybody has any further thoughts on how we could like up the trust in the civic, community-minded citizen. And like, I do think it could address across the board so much of what's been spoken about so intelligently. So how can we keep fostering that love and that trust and that belief in each other? Go.
Thanks, Naomi. Panel? Thoughts on trust?
And it is like intergovernmental citizen, it's like grassroots to government. It's just like that fundamental core competency that we talk about in school.
I think my thought on this is like purely as a citizen, Definitely not an academic or a professional in this capacity, but the choices that we're making now as a city will stay with us for quite some time. There is a number of walking tours that happen in Vancouver. One of them is focused around prohibition. And there was some pretty shocking learnings along the way there that tell us some choices that were made like close to the turn of the century that still affect how bars and restaurants are set up in the city today. So I think what we're seeing in terms of those plazas, as a European, there's a lot of good in there for me. I think Vancouver is quite a stringent city when it comes to like outside socialness, etc. From an entertainment perspective. But one way or another, the things that are being approved or being experimented with today, I think we have the opportunity to keep those things, the positives of those going forward.
I would say the one lesson we've learned is that we can actually move much quicker than we ever thought possible. And I think Lynsey really flags that and highlights it nicely that, with pop-up parks or with bike lanes or with bus lanes, I mean, these are projects that have in many cases been on the books for decades and have been debated and relitigated and debated. And then we just got on with it and did it. And I think at the core of building trust is transparency, is having good information that allows you to make decisions, to set a baseline that allows everyone to understand what the measures of success are, and then you look back and you review. And if something doesn't work, you admit transparently that it didn't work, and you try to make changes. And if it still doesn't work, you take it out. And I think we're learning how to do that, and we're learning that that's the way you build trust and you enable change. And I think we're really in a moment of the pace of change, that people are experiencing such dislocation that we have to pick our spots, and we have to understand which moments and which places are where to push, and which are the places where we can say, let's go a little bit slower. But I think overall, the pandemic is driving us to be creative and innovative, and to try to think, especially how we do this together and work collaboratively towards better solutions.
And I will add that while we're in the creating more public space and more, I think it's really important that we recognize that public space continues to be a place where the disenfranchised are criminalized, and we certainly are seeing that in Vancouver with the recent a survey that the Vancouver Police Department has put forward, and so while we're kind of reckoning with the fast pace that we've been, creating public space. And I think Lynsey was trying to say that Vancouver's a no fun city, but maybe she might not been so direct as that. So yes, a lot of innovation in the public space. There in building equity with that, we must be certain to recognize that the disenfranchised are definitely criminalized in public space. And we have so much homelessness and substance use, and so building that out has to bring peace to the criminalization of the disenfranchised, combined with a reality that in building these new spaces, we have to recognize folks who have disabilities, and the challenge what happens with all these kind of structures that are happening within the streets and little pop-up places. How will people with disabilities navigate those spaces? And so these are the conversations that are important for us to keep in mind when we're building trust, because it is about trusting that we will not continue to stratify our communities based on access and oppression.
Thank you. I'm not going to, unfortunately, give any of the other panelists a chance to say anything else, because we have now reached our time. I want to just say that I've so appreciated and enjoyed this conversation with the panel. Sometimes when we talk about the economy, we frame the conversation in terms of income, in terms of the cash that's coming in and out right at the moment. And I don't want to minimize for a moment the cash crunch that many people are suffering right now with the COVID crisis, and forced to take very difficult choices and with limited options right now. That's absolutely a part of the current condition. But I think what I really appreciated was the way the discussion talked more to a notion of the economy in the sense of development. And so what we really ended up talking about tonight were new organizations, new infrastructures, new connections, new ways of thinking about settlements, new ways of thinking about the institutions that make up the economy, as well as a lot of conversation and thought about the way existing infrastructures and organizations and relationships and public institutions, the way those existing ones are taking on a new role and need to take on a new role in building a post-COVID economy that's better than the one that brought us to where we are now. So really, thanks so much to the panel for a very stimulating and an enjoyable conversation. Thanks also to Urban Studies and to Public Square. I believe the Pandemonium series will be back in January with a topic on the 27th about housing. There's going to be one on urban resilience in February, and in March we're going to take it to the streets. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm looking forward to joining you on that ride. So thanks all very much for just a really great session tonight. And stay well and stay healthy.